Welcome everyone. We will talk about the supply chain, how it is important, what impact, what role does it play in disaster. So yes, logistic in disaster is the premises of today's video. Every year, disaster causes innumerable injuries, innumerable deaths, devastating economic damages, and despite the advances of science, despite so many of improvement and so much of an experiences, we are still at largely desperate against disasters. Disasters continue to cause physical damages, psychological damages, which are there in the people's mind throughout their life. Disaster preparedness is the only way to mitigate disaster. Disaster management is required. Disaster response systems are more required, pertinent, and definitive in action plans. Remember, every community, the community where disaster strike is not only responsible, it is the responsibility not only about the community but about the society. Not only about the society but the local government, provincial government, the national government. We require international humanitarian aid operation at the times of disasters. And please, you have to just wipe out your newspaper or go into the newsprint to see how many disasters has struck in last 2 months all around the globe. The goal is to provide human a respectable dignity life, a respectable standard to every disaster victim altogether. Disaster suspends normal life. It abrupts it. It wrecks the normal life of a living person. Absolutely. The social activities goes for a toss and other means they cause physical damages, social damages, economic damages, cultural damages. Remember, effective community gets scarred throughout their life just because of those disaster which might be man-made, disaster which might be natural or geographical in nature. So types, what are the types of disaster? Different kinds of disaster require different approaches, both in terms of humanitarian aid operation. Let us look at the disaster type: rapid onset of natural disasters such as earthquake, tornadoes, storms; rapid onset of man-made disasters such as terror attacks, industrial accidents, pillage of hazardous material; slow onset of natural disaster like starvation, famine, epidemic; slow onset of man-made disaster like economic crisis, refugee crisis. You look what are the different types. They are broadly classified into man-made and natural. From there also there is something called fast impact and slow impact, and that is what we would like to go around here. So we are talking about the rapid onset of natural disaster, earthquake, tornado, storms; rapid onset of man-made disaster, terror attacks, industrial accident; slow onset of natural disaster are all about starvation, famine, epidemic; slow onset of man-made disaster or economic crisis, refugee crises, and so on and so forth. Disaster logistic is what we are talking about in terms of complementary and interconnected connectedness. Every humanitarian and operation largely consists of logistic phases, thereby humanitarian aid. What should we be doing around for saving lives, both be it natural calamities or man-made disaster? What should be doing? Humanitarian aid should give support to the disaster victim. They should be given a long-term restoration goals and solving problems that can be caused just because of migration, as the case might be, and that is what we need to provide them. There should be a sense of companionship, belongingness, and they should not be left all by alone. Disaster logistic is the efficient humanitarian aid operation depend on the speed of transportation and humanitarian aid materials and services at accurate point at right time in right conditions to the places in need. Disaster logistics is planning, is implementation and management of storage and flow of aid material and necessary information then and there, every now and then, as on when on possible. Let me bring you to you the three, four stages of disaster logistic. Disaster logistic are basically all about preparation, responses, and reconstruction phases. Preparation, responses, and reconstruction phases. We'll talk about each of the phases one by one. Preparedness trace is the most important part of the disaster logistic activities. Why? Because we should, this is the stage where should take into the account of stock of things. what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, how do we plan in cases of emergency situation, in cases of disaster. There is to be a blueprint of what needs to be done. So yes, we require a lot of coordination. Yes, we require a lot of mobilizations of response mechanism, education, drills. The procurement and storage of the aid material needs to be done as an early warning system then and there. So yes, preparedness phase is the most important phases that I believe so. Before the disaster happen, if you are well prepared, you will be able to mitigate or to a certain extent reduce the damages causes caused by the disaster. Post disaster, immediately post disaster would be a response phase. Response phase comes just after the preparedness stage, but beginning with the occurrence of the disaster. Logistic activities are mostly used in response state. The quick response from big disasters such as earthquake, such as flood, such as typhoons is important for saving lives. Damages reduction in this stage, effectiveness of the rescue effort depend right at the distribution of aid material, and sufficient aid personnel should be made available. It is not only material that should be sufficient, there should be people volunteering themselves to distribute the aid material, ensure that the aid material reaches the victims perhaps, and that is what responsive state is all about. It this can only be done if your preparedness state is done thoroughly. The last stage would be a reconstruction stage, the restoration phase. It is where we take the longest possible time to bring life back to normalcy. Restoration process aims the normalization of lives in the disaster hit communities. How do we do it? By building the infrastructure. How do we do it? By ensuring the confidence among the community, by the government. Accordingly, reconstruction of infrastructures, devastated building, provision of jobs, education efforts should take place in the state. The use of information system and logistic is very important. Yes, with the advancement of technology, IT has come to an aid of disaster management. Remember, the procurement, the storage, the distribution of aid material requires proper coordination, proper inventory, proper understanding. Humanitarian logistic information system provide the integration of logistic units into the humanitarian supply chain, improve logistic activities throughout the organization as the case might be. Allow me to give certain problem that people are facing in the disaster logistic, essentially in the underdeveloped countries, underdeveloped areas, zones, where there are inadequate infrastructure for to mitigate disaster areas. This becomes a huge problem in implementing or distributing the humanitarian aids. The operation takes a backseat because of the inadequate infrastructure. It creates a huge bottleneck, huge impediment, becomes very difficult to enact the plan that has been done, despite the intention of the international communities to help the affected community, despite the intention that the requisite materials for humanitarian aid is available. This is what we need to go around it. These are the current problems. Remember, insufficient capacities in terms of airport, ports, insecure storage area, lack of loading equipment are some of this congestion. Bad conditions of rails, highways, freetages, height limitation of tunnel and bridges, inadequate signal system of road decrease the efficiency of logistic activities. So in short, let me wind up by telling the truly efficient implementation of disaster logistic is very important in disaster area. Causes every aid material and services in the disaster areas can save, will save, and definitely we need to insist on saving lives. Logistic plays an important role in disaster preparedness. In fact, they are the backbone to implement the humanitarian aid facilities. Consequently, logistics have an important role not only in the preparedness stage but also in the reconstruction stage and the response stage. It is where we are looking into disaster management. For successful disaster management, successful disaster logistic is required. With this, I come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video till the very end.